She was in the fetal position, stripped, and there was some bruise marks, there was some chain marks. She was abused.
It was obvious that she had been killed somewhere else and unfortunately taken to this location and just dumped in the back of her car like trash.
Hello and welcome back. If you are new to our channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future videos. Now, let's dive into the harrowing and gruesome case of Susan Reinert. A case remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in American history. It all began on the evening of Sunday, June 24, 1979. Two men heading to work in Pennsylvania checked into the Host Inn around 7:30 p.m. As they walked into the front desk, they noticed an orange 1978 Plymouth Horizon in the parking lot with its hatch partially open. However, they forgot to notify the front desk. 7 hours later, at 2 a.m. on Monday, June 25th, a Swatara Township police officer on routine patrol noticed the vehicle with the hatch still open. After running the plates, he discovered that the car belonged to a 37-year-old woman named Susan Reinert. The officer went inside the hotel to check if a guest by that name was staying there, but there was no guest registered under her name. The officer received a call about a fatal car accident, so he left the scene without investigating further. A few hours later, at 5:20 a.m., Dauphin County Police received a call from a man who identified himself as Larry Brown.
There's a sick woman in the back of the car in the parking lot of the motel.
Within 10 minutes, two police officers arrived. What they found was not a sick woman. It was a scene that would haunt their darkest nightmares. Inside the hatchback of the car was the body of a petite, naked woman, curled into a fetal position. She had clearly been dead for at least 24 hours. Her body was covered in bruises, her eyes black and blue, and her wrists and ankles bore the marks of chains. The woman was identified as Susan Reinert, a 37-year-old schoolteacher and mother of two. But the horror didn't end there. Susan had last been seen alive with her two young children, 11-year-old Karen and 10-year-old Michael. The children were nowhere to be found. This chilling discovery marked the beginning of what would become one of the most complex and controversial criminal investigations in Pennsylvania's history. The brutal nature of Susan's death and the mysterious disappearance of her children left investigators and the public grasping for answers. To understand what happened, we need to go back to the beginning. Susan Gallagher, known affectionately as Sue, was born in 1943 in the picturesque town of Ridgeway, nestled in northwestern Pennsylvania. Her parents, William and Jane Gallagher, were respected members of the community. Her father, a business manager for the local newspaper, and her mother, a devoted teacher. From a young age, Susan was set on following in her mother's footsteps. She was vice president of the Future Teachers of America in high school, class treasurer, business manager of the yearbook, and president of the drama club. After high school, Susan attended Grove City College, where she met her future husband, Kenneth Reinert, a captain in the Air Force. They married in 1965. Over the years, the young couple had two children, Karen and Michael. After Ken's military service, the family settled near Philadelphia, where Susan got a job as an English teacher at Upper Merion High School in 1971. Upper Merion High School was considered a prestigious institution where academic excellence was a priority. At the time Susan started working there, the principal was a man named J.C. Smith, and the head of the English department was another teacher, William Bill Bradfield. Bill Bradfield was a charismatic womanizer, and Susan eventually found herself drawn to him. She admired his intellect and passion, especially compared to her husband Ken, who watched TV all day. In 1974, Susan and Bill began a secret relationship. Susan's marriage was already on shaky ground, and her growing attraction to Bill only made things worse. She and Ken eventually separated. Their separation was a peaceful closing that left no room for legal battles or lingering animosity. At Upper Merion, Susan was a beloved teacher. She co-advised the yearbook, taught a film class, and was working on a statewide program to reform the curriculum. She was an active member of Parents Without Partners, where she played a pivotal role in the Valley Forge chapter, a support group for single parents and their children. That evening, Susan's son, Michael, spent some time with his father, Kenneth. They shared a special moment at a father-son softball game. Around 8:30 p.m., their time was cut short due to bad weather, and Susan picked Michael up earlier than planned. Later that night, Michael called his father, apologized for rushing out of the game, explaining that he had to return home to scrub the floors before leaving for the weekend with his mother and sister. Susan planned to attend a Parents Without Partners workshop in Allentown, Pennsylvania. She had signed her children up for activities at the workshop and had even called her in-laws, John and Florence Reinhardt, to ask if a full tank of gas would be enough to get her to and from Allentown. However, later that evening, Susan called the president of the Regional Council for Parents Without Partners to cancel her workshop due to something personal. At around 9 p.m., a neighbor saw Susan's kids playing outside in a hailstorm. Just half an hour later, neighbors heard the unmistakable sound of Susan's orange-red Plymouth Horizon starting up. The car quickly vanished from the driveway. For 2 agonizing days, there was no sign of Susan or her children. The growing uncertainty and fear weighed heavily on everyone who knew and loved them. Then, on June 25, 1979, Susan's lifeless body was found nearly 100 miles from Allentown and 2 hours from her home in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. 2 Pennsylvania state police officers were the first on the scene. They carefully inspected the car and Susan's body, noting multiple abrasions and bruises on her forearms, behind her knees, on the back of her neck, and on her ankles. There was dried blood mixed with mucus in her mouth and nose, and discolored bruising around her eyes, particularly her right eye. These injuries indicated that Susan had been brutally assaulted before her death. Adding to the horror, it was discovered that Susan had been given a lethal dose of morphine before she died. Inside the car, investigators found a few items, but none provided a clear indication of what Susan had been doing at the Host Inn. There was no purse, no car keys, no clothing, and no personal belongings, nothing that could immediately explain why she was there. The car still had half a tank of gas, suggesting that it had not been driven far after she left home. However, there were some odd items found in the car that puzzled investigators. Under Susan's body in the trunk, they discovered a large green garbage bag and a blue cone with the inscription 79th U.S. ARCOM and the Cross of Lorraine. Additionally, under the front seat, they found a rubber dildo. Even worse, the car showed signs that someone had tried to wipe away their fingerprints. Swipe marks were visible in the morning dew on the driver's side of the car, and the rearview mirror had been completely removed. These efforts to cover tracks suggested that whoever killed Susan was not a simple criminal. But the nightmare didn't end there. Her 2 children seemingly disappeared into thin air. Despite exhaustive searches and desperate hope that they were safe with a babysitter, none of Susan's regular sitters, friends, or family had seen them that weekend. The police quickly mobilized, flooding the country with pictures of Reinhardt family, hoping that someone, somewhere, might recognize the missing children. As the investigation deepened, a shocking revelation came to light. Susan Reinhardt had named her boyfriend Bill Bradfield as the beneficiary of her life insurance policies, which worth a staggering $730,000. This discovery raised chilling suspicions. Could the children have been killed to clear the path for Bill's financial gain? Yet, Bill Bradfield had an ironclad alibi. He spent the weekend in Cape May, New Jersey. Several other teachers confirmed his whereabouts. The detectives turned their focus to Upper Merion High School, where Susan worked, a place already mired in scandal. The school's former principal, J.C. Smith, was at the center of the storm. J.C. Smith came to Upper Merion High School in the fall of 1966 to serve as the school's principal. He was 37 years old at the time and a colonel in the Army Reserves with aspirations to become a general. From the start, everyone at the school found him to be very different. Smith always wore black suits, but these suits often appeared to be ill-fitting. Standing at 6'2" with prematurely receding dark hair and waxy skin, Smith didn't particularly stand out in a crowd. But those who encountered him could never forget his eyes. Cold, empty, and unsettling. Smith confused everyone around him. He came to work, then mysteriously disappeared for hours. When he returned, he would walk briskly into his office, lock the door, and refuse to explain his absence to anyone. He obsessed with washing his hands in the bathroom, sometimes up to 20 times a day, and there was always a peculiar chemical smell coming from his office. Smith's odd behavior extended to his interactions with the staff. He often used big words to confuse and throw off the teachers. Smith seemed to particularly dislike Susan Reinert's boyfriend, Bill Bradfield. There was a palpable tension between J. Smith and Bill Bradfield. While Bradfield was charismatic and admired by many, Smith was seen as a bizarre and unsettling figure. The two men couldn't have been more different, and their interactions were often strained. Smith was married and had 2 daughters, but his family life was anything but ordinary. His wife, Stephanie, was bubbly and outgoing, a sharp contrast to her mysterious husband. However, she was diagnosed with a vicious form of cancer, a battle she would lose in August of 1979. During her final years in and out of hospitals, Stephanie began keeping a diary. Her entries painted a grim picture of her husband's increasingly bizarre behavior. According to Stephanie, Smith always kept their basement locked and wouldn't let anyone down there. Once Stephanie had broken into the basement and Smith's love letters, swingers magazine, a devil costume, and several dildos. But instead of confronting him, Stephanie went to see a lawyer and began gossiping with her friends and coworkers about Smith's bizarre behavior. In September of 1977, J. Smith's adult daughter, also named Stephanie, and her husband, Edward Hunsberger, returned home. The young couple were far from model citizens. Both had been wrestling with heroin addiction for years. Moving back in with Stephanie's parents was an act of desperation, a last-ditch effort to escape their demons. In February 1978, they failed to show up for a scheduled meeting with probation officer, disappeared without a trace. Authorities began to search for the couple, and their inquiries led them back to J. Smith. When asked about his daughter and son-in-law, Jay claimed that they had fled to California to escape drug dealers and avoid arrest, but there was no evidence to support this story. Stephanie and Edward's disappearance went largely unnoticed, as they had been living a transient lifestyle, disconnected from a stable community. Meanwhile, J. Smith's life continued to spiral. In August 1978, a young couple saw a man with a hood over his head, holding 2 guns, peering into the windows of a van. Terrified, the couple called the police. They quickly tracked down the man's car, a brown Ford Granada, and pulled it over. The driver was none other than J.C. Smith. Inside Smith's car, the police found an arsenal of weapons, including 4 loaded handguns, a homemade silencer, and syringes filled with a powerful sedative called Placidol. They also found trash bags, strapping tape, and gloves, as well as the Social Security card of Stephanie Hunsberger, Smith's daughter, who had been missing along with her husband for several months. Smith was promptly arrested, but the case took an even darker turn when the police discovered bullet holes in the walls of Smith's basement and a collection of firearms, marijuana, prescription pills, security guard uniforms, badges, and disturbing pornography. Among the more bizarre discoveries were containers of nitric acid and stolen office equipment from a local school. It became clear that Smith was far more than just odd. He was a deeply dangerous man with a sick life. As the investigation into Smith's activities progressed, more disturbing details emerged. Smith had been involved in a series of robberies, posing as a Brinks security guard to steal money from local Sears stores. He had also been cashing welfare checks sent to his missing daughter and son-in-law, forging their signatures to receive the money long after they had disappeared. Jay's unsettling reputation at Upper Merion High School had earned him the nickname the Prince of Darkness. On June 25, 1979, Jay Smith was sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison for burglary. But this was just the beginning. Even behind bars, Jay remained the prime suspect in Susan's death, and the police intensified their scrutiny of his past. What they uncovered was both chilling and startling. Jay's own daughter and her husband had mysteriously vanished in a manner eerily similar to the disappearance of Susan and her children. Susan Reinert's autopsy pointed to death by strangulation or suffocation, with a wide time frame, making it difficult to pin down Jay's involvement. Yet, there was enough morphine in Susan's system to kill her 10 times over, strongly suggesting a deliberate overdose. This substance that had been found in significant quantities in Smith's home. And in another damning piece of evidence, a plastic comb bearing the insignia of Jay's military unit and a dildo was discovered in Susan's car. Moreover, Susan's boyfriend, Bill Bradfield, claimed that Smith was a hitman for the mafia and he was planning to kill Susan Reinert. Bradfield had been spending nights with Smith trying to convince him not to go through with the murder. These coincidences pointed to a pattern that was as terrifying as it was clear. Jay Smith might be a serial killer. The events surrounding these cases were shocking enough to captivate the public's attention, but what was uncovered next would reveal a twist more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. About a month after Susan Reinert's body was discovered near Harrisburg, investigators unearthed a potential motive: financial gain. On July 20, 1979, a Philadelphia lawyer took a decisive step by filing a caveat in both Montgomery and Delaware counties on behalf of Susan's ex-husband, Kenneth Reinert, and her brother, Patrick Gallagher. This legal move was designed to temporarily freeze any proceedings related to Susan's will in either county, giving these two parties the chance to examine the documents thoroughly. Just a week later, a startling revelation came to light. A few weeks before her death, Susan had made significant changes to her will. She took out several expensive life insurance policies, naming her boyfriend, Bill Bradfield, as the sole beneficiary. In her legal documents, she ominously referred to him as her future husband. In the weeks leading up to her death, Susan systematically withdrew large sums of cash from her accounts, nearly $25,000 in total. Due to daily withdrawal limits, she made multiple deposits, telling bank employees that she planned to invest the money in high-yield investments managed by her boyfriend. But investigators made a startling discovery: fake stocks and bonds hidden in Susan's home. It was Bill who had given these fraudulent securities to Susan. He had forged and sold her worthless documents, linked to non-existent companies, as part of a long-running scam. Therefore, by March 1980, William was called to testify in a civil suit. Yet during his initial appearance, he refused to answer questions, deferring all inquiries to his legal counsel. His lawyers, while denying that William had taken Susan's money, were nevertheless open to negotiating a settlement with the state. This negotiation would involve processing Susan's will, which now stood at a staggering $7 million. In June 1980, Bill Bradfield took the stand for the first time during the civil trial, where he downplayed nearly every aspect of his connection to Susan Reinert and the case. He claimed that their relationship wasn't serious. He had no plans to marry her. In a surprising twist, Bill even accused Susan of having an affair with Jay Smith. Those who knew Susan well were shocked by this claim. Throughout the trial, Bill avoided answering crucial questions, particularly when it came to why Susan had named him the sole beneficiary of an estate worth over $1 million. Instead, he painted Susan as an unreliable and troubled individual. He was merely helping her clean up the messes she had created in her life. As the civil suit over the missing $25,000 continued, Susan's brother and ex-husband took action, filing a separate lawsuit in June 1980. Their goal was to recover the full amount of Susan's life insurance policy, around $450,000. On February 20, 1981, police arrested William Bill Bradfield on 2 counts of theft and 1 count of conspiracy, accusing him of pocketing the $25,000 that Susan Reinert had entrusted him for supposed investments. On August 3, 1981, after a tense 5-day trial, Bill was found guilty of theft. His bond was increased from $25,000 to $75,000 because the conviction made him a greater flight risk, especially his murder charges looming on the horizon. William Bill Bradfield was the son of a retired Western Electric corporate executive. Bill attended Haverford College, where he became obsessed with the American poet Ezra Pound. Bill's relationship with Ezra Pound extended beyond admiration. He developed a personal relationship with the poet. He often visited Pound at St. Elizabeth's Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Washington, D.C. Bill even fantasized about breaking Pound out of the hospital and hiding him in his attic, a plan that never materialized. At school, Bill was charismatic, intelligent, and incredibly passionate about art, music, and literature. That's why women like Susan Reinert were attracted to him. Susan had no idea she was just one of many women caught in Bill's web of deceit. One of them was Sue Myers, another English teacher. For years, Sue believed they would marry, but Bill always found reasons to delay any commitment. Bill's relationships with both women were marked by manipulation and deceit. He told Sue that he was committed to her, but had to keep their relationship a secret to avoid complications at work. Meanwhile, he told Susan that they would get married within 5 years. His lies began to unravel when Sue Myers found Susan's love letter to Bill. This discovery sparked a confrontation between the two women, but instead of realizing they were both being played, they continued to fight over Bill. Bill was a master manipulator. His influence extended beyond romantic entanglements. He had a group of followers, including Chris Pappas and Vincent Valladis. They worshipped him like a god. One of Bill's most significant schemes was his plan to buy an ocean-going boat and sail to Barcelona. Bill had mortgaged his house to invest in his craft store, but the business was struggling and he needed another source of funds. In January 1979, Bill's manipulation took a financial turn. He convinced Susan to take out a $250,000 life insurance policy with New York Life, naming him as the sole beneficiary. The following month, Susan took out another policy with USAA for the same amount, but this one included a $200,000 accidental death rider. This meant that if Susan died within a year, even if her death was ruled accidental or even a murder, Bill would receive an additional $200,000. Unbeknownst to Susan, Bill was already plotting her death to collect on these policies. In addition to manipulating Susan into taking out life insurance policies, Bill also persuaded her to invest in what he described as a lucrative business opportunity. He convinced her to invest $25,000, a significant sum at the time. Bill's manipulation was not limited to Susan's financial assets. He also worked to ensure that he would be the sole beneficiary of her estate. In April 1979, he convinced Susan to change her will. Bill presented this to his followers as evidence that Susan was trying to trap him, claiming that she was so obsessed with him that she wanted to ensure he was always in her life. While Bill was weaving his financial web around Susan, he was also stoking fear among his followers. He told them Jay Smith was a murderer planning to kill Susan, and it was their duty to stop him. Bill claimed that he had to enter into a teacher-disciple relationship with Smith to gain his trust and gather evidence against him. Bill went so far as to show Chris Pappas a collection of items called Smith's Instruments of Death: chains, tape, plastic bags, and even a gun. Smith gave him these for safekeeping. Now it was Chris Pappas's responsibility to hide them. Bill also convinced Chris Pappas to build a silencer, claimed that it might be necessary to kill Smith if there was no other way. As the weeks went on, Bill's behavior became more erratic. He was plotting an ironclad alibi. He planned a trip to Cape May, New Jersey, with Sue Myers, Vincent Valladis, and Chris Pappas, ensuring that he would be far from King of Prussia when Susan disappeared. Finally, on Friday, June 22, 1979, Bill decided it was time to kill Susan. That morning, Bill instructed Chris Pappas to retrieve a significant amount of money from a safety deposit box. After that, Bill spent several hours with Shelley, his 19-year-old new girlfriend, at a motel. He instructed her to withdraw the remaining money from the safety deposit box and hide it at her parents' house, ensuring that no one could find it later. As the evening progressed, the pieces of Bill's plan began to fall into place. While his followers were busy with their assigned tasks, Bill was laying the groundwork for his alibi. He arranged for a trip to Cape May with his core group, Sue Myers, Vincent Valladis, and Chris Pappas. That night, Vincent Velatus and Sue Myers waited for Bill at his home. However, Bill failed to show up at the expected time. Sue Myers began to grow frustrated. She suspected that Bill took another girl to Cape May. But Bill did show up at around 11:15 p.m. Without offering much explanation, Bill claimed that he had gone to his wife's house to say goodbye before leaving for the summer. It turned out, Bill was planning to spend not only the weekend in Cape May, but also the entire summer in New Mexico, taking summer courses at St. John's College. This extended absence was a key part of his plan to avoid suspicion if the murder was discovered. Once Bill arrived, the group hurriedly gathered their belongings and prepared to leave. Bill's agitation grew with each passing minute, and by the time they collected Chris Pappas from his house, it was already after midnight. Pappas, as usual, was the one who drove, while Bill, exhausted from the day's activities, nodded off in the back seat. As they crossed the Walt Whitman Toll Plaza, a suspension bridge in Pennsylvania, Bill suddenly awoke with a start. He shot upright in his seat and declared a terrifying prophecy. He could feel in his bones that this was the weekend Jay Smith killed Susan Reinhardt. This was part of Bill's ongoing narrative to frame Smith. He claimed he had tried to stop it. He followed Smith to Susan's house and drove around it over a dozen times until he lost Smith in a freak hailstorm. Bill told his group that it was now in God's hands, and they could do no more. That night, the group spent the evening drinking wine and reading to each other. But the mood was tense. Everyone was on edge, particularly as the conversation kept returning to the possibility that Jay Smith might be murdering Susan at that very moment. The following day, Bill insisted on going to church with the entire group. He claimed that they needed to pray for Susan because it was the only way they could help her now. When the group checked out of their rooms on Monday, Bill made a scene at the front desk, demanding a written receipt that showed he had paid for 3 nights instead of 2. This was crucial for his alibi, as it would later prove that Bill had been in Cape May for the entire weekend. The hotel staff complied with his request to get rid of a crazy guess. Before leaving Cape May, Bill took Chris Pappas aside and showed him a stack of letters that he claimed he had received from Susan Reinhardt. These letters were another piece of evidence that Bill intended to frame Smith. He told Pappas that he planned to destroy the letters to eliminate any proof of a connection between himself and Susan. But when Pappas later noticed the letters still in the car, Bill brushed off his concerns, saying he would handle them later. As they drove back to Pennsylvania, Bill had Pappas stop at a dumpster near his house, where they disposed of the letters by covering them with trash. Bill was meticulous in his efforts to destroy any evidence that could link him to Susan's murder, but his paranoia and need for control led him to make critical mistakes. On April 6, 1983, William Bill Bradfield was arrested by Pennsylvania state troopers and hit with a slew of charges: 3 counts of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and obstructing the administration of the law. The grand jury suggested that Bill had been well aware of the plot to kill Susan Reinhardt and her children. They accused him of playing a complicit role in these horrific crimes. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Bill had been planning Susan's murder for months. Bill's followers, including Chris Pappas, Vincent Velatus, and Sue Myers, started to realize that they had been duped. They were determined to tell the truth, even if it meant implicating themselves in the process. They painted a damning picture of Bill as a calculating and ruthless manipulator who had used his followers to carry out his plan. Their testimony was supported by other evidence that the police had gathered, including the letters, the financial documents, and the typewriter that had been used to forge Susan's signature. The indictment against Bill was bolstered by a chilling confession from a fellow inmate. He claimed that Bill admitted to kill Susan during a chess match in prison. During the trial, the prosecution presented a compelling case against Bill, arguing that he had planned and executed the murder of Susan Reinhardt for financial gain. The defense, meanwhile, tried to shift the blame onto Jay Smith, but the jury was not convinced. The weight of the evidence against Bill was overwhelming, and after a lengthy trial, he was found guilty of first-degree murder.
Susan Reinert claimed this man, William Bradfield, promised to marry her. She even made him the sole beneficiary of her $760,000 insurance policy. Today, Bradfield stands convicted of masterminding the murders that Smith committed. He's serving 3 life sentences.
Meanwhile, in the 1980s, J. Smith couldn't escape being dragged into the spotlight. Despite his attempts to invoke the Fifth Amendment, he was compelled to testify before a grand jury. In April 1985, J. Smith was asked to provide handwriting samples, likely linked to old documents that outlined Susan Reinert murder plot. This request would soon seal his fate. On June 25, 1985, exactly 6 years after Susan's body was discovered, Smith was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was taken into custody, facing the weight of these accusations as he awaited trial. From behind bars, J. Smith adamantly proclaimed his innocence, filing appeals and insisting that he had been framed by Bill Bradfield. In a surprising turn of events in 1989, the courts agreed to revisit his case. They uncovered serious issues with the prosecution and granted Smith a new trial.
I was an easy target. Everybody was believing that I was involved in this criminal activity. So I was an easy target for Bradfield to frame. I did not kill Susan Reinert and had nothing to do with her murder or any crimes against her or her children. Nothing whatever.
In 1990, Smith waived his right to a speedy trial to ensure a thorough investigation. By 1992, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in his favor, vacating his murder conviction and citing misconduct by the prosecution. Despite the shocking reversal, the state chose not to retry the case, allowing J. Smith to live out his days as a free man. While the investigation into Susan's murder was underway, another tragedy was unfolding. Karen and Michael Reinhardt, Susan's children, were missing, and their whereabouts remained a mystery. Ken Reinhardt, Susan's ex-husband, was devastated by the news of Susan's death and the disappearance of their children. He spent days frantically searching for any sign of them, reaching out to friends, family, and law enforcement for help. But despite his efforts, there was no trace of Karen and Michael. The search for the children became a priority for the police, who feared that they might have met the same fate as their mother. As days turned into weeks, the chances of finding them alive dwindled, and the community braced itself for the worst. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence to emerge during this time was an essay that Michael had written for his 5th grade class just a month before his disappearance. In the essay, Michael described a nightmare-like scenario in which he was captured by strange people, thrown into a cage, and left in a ditch with worms. The essay ended with Michael escaping by using a duplication gun to create a copy of himself, confusing his captors and allowing him to flee. The essay, with its eerie parallels to the events that would soon unfold, sent shivers down the spines of those who read it. Was this merely the product of a child's vivid imagination, or had Michael somehow sensed the danger that was looming over his family? On January 16, 1998, William Bill Bradfield, who had spent over a decade behind bars, was found unresponsive in his cell. He was later pronounced dead from cardiac arrest, leaving many questions unanswered. Susan Reinert's ex-husband, Kenneth Reinert, passed away in June 2002, taking with him the heartache of never knowing the fate of his 2 missing children. J. Smith, whose conviction was overturned in 1992, went on to write books about the case and even remarried in 2002. He passed away on May 12, 2009. His involvement in the Reinert case and the mysterious 1978 disappearance of his daughter and son-in-law, Stephanie and Edward Hunsberger, still remained a mystery. What do you think really happened? Was Bill Bradfield the true culprit, or is there more to this dark tale? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for tuning in to our channel. We hope you found this video both engaging and informative. If you did, please show your support by liking the video and subscribing to our channel. We love hearing from our viewers, so feel free to leave a comment with your feedback or any suggestions for future cases you'd like us to explore. Until next time, stay safe and keep questioning.